I've been getting asked this question over and over again, and I'm here to tell you it really honestly doesn't matter which race you choose. However, each race can help you or potentially hurt you just a little bit in terms of which class you choose. If you're someone who really cares about that 2% difference and you want to take every advantage you can get, more power to you. Then I'm going to tell you which races go with which class. Now I'm actually going to go over this in the character creation profile section because you can actually see how the races will hurt or help your stats, but you don't know what the class stats are, so I'm actually going to give you the knowledge that you need in order to figure out if this is going to hurt or help your class. Let's get into it. So here I just logged into my LOTRO account and I'm actually going to go to the new character screen so you could see like where the stats are that are really important for your race. So here you can actually go through all of the races right now and figure out what their characteristics are, and depending on their characteristics they can have stats that are going to help or hurt your class. Now the thing is that the classes don't actually show like what your main stat is, but I'm actually going to go through that right now. The way I'm determining which race is best for which class is simply by going through your character section and looking through your stats depending on which class you've chosen. Now you can't do this until you actually choose a race and a class and start playing a character. But if you do have a character already, log into them on LOTRO, hit C for your character section, pop that up, and then you can actually see like some of the basic stats. For that could be might, vitality, agility, will, and even fate. If you go through each of those, you can actually see that the game will tell you which one is very important for you, and that's essentially like your main stat. That's the one that you really want to focus on. And then you'll also have a secondary one, which is typically vitality for I think like every class. Every class is pretty much going to want some sort of vitality as their like second main important stat to really focus on. However, depending on which class you have, your main very important stat that you want to focus on could be very different. So here, because I've played this game for over a decade, I can pretty much tell you right off the bat what is your most very important stat and which is like your secondary one. And then I can actually look at the characteristics here and then tell you which race will probably help you or potentially hurt you if you were to choose a specific class for that race. So right off the bat, I'm going to tell you right now, the only race that you can choose for the class of Beorning is simply a Beorning. Like, they're the only race that can morph into bears, so that's why. But here, if you actually go through some of the characteristics, if you were to scroll over them, Beornings do have a plus 15 might, which actually is your very most important stat that you want to focus on as a Beorning. So that definitely helps you. They also have -7 fate, which doesn't really hurt you too much. I'm not really going to go into some of those if it's not a very important stat for you. There are some ways that could potentially hurt you depending on your class, but I'm not really going to cover it in this video. I'm just going to stick to the very, very basics. So here for the Burglar, their number one very most important stat is going to be agility, and their secondary is vitality. So let's go over the men's. Here you can actually see it's plus 15 fate, -7 will, which will doesn't really affect us too much, so plus 5% incoming healing. If you're someone who's actually probably going to do like a little more like group content, maybe that might be something to kind of interest you. But I'm a soloer. It's not like you have heals as like a Burglar. It's not like I'm going to be giving out heals, so it doesn't affect me whatsoever. It's not like people are going to come up like randos in the game and try to heal me. And then here is plus 15 might. So literally none of the stats really help us, and we're just going to get minus stats on other things that just don't really concern us either. So let's move on to a different race for Burglars. Instead of boring you through all of this, the only race that has an agility boost is going to be Elves. So they do have a plus 15 characteristic for agility for you. However, they do have a -20 max morale and a -1 non-combat morale regen, but I wouldn't focus too much on that. But -20 max morale can kind of hurt you a little bit, especially as a Burglar. Then you also have -7 fate, and then they have a +1 disease and +1 poison resistance. So it's alright. The only thing that's really going to help us here, and it also kind of hurts us, is that we're not going to have any like max morale really. And then we have really good agility with that boost, but I almost think that not having a good max morale, even though it's pretty easy to fix, I wouldn't personally go for elf, though you could definitely be an elf burglar, because if you want to focus on your very main important stat of agility, go ahead, be an elf burglar. Definitely not a bad issue. However, I'm actually going to recommend the Hobbit for burglars. I've never seen like a true Hobbit burglar really struggle in comparison to other class. However, I'm going to actually recommend that you choose a Hobbit burglar just based on their smaller size. It's going to be less likely that if you're doing stealth primarily, it's going to be less likely that you're going to be seen. Plus, they also have a plus 15 fatality. They have a minus 7 might, which doesn't affect us. Plus a 1 non-combat morale regen, which fear resistance 1%, which will be very important as a burglar later. And then also a plus 1 shadow mitigation, which is also going to be super important for you as a burglar. So I would honestly recommend a burglar Hobbit, though definitely my secondary choice. Maybe it should be my primary choice, but worst case, just do elf burglar, just a regular elf. I have to say right off the bat though, I'm definitely not going to recommend a high elf for really anyone, because look at these stats. It's a minus 7 will, which can hurt a good amount of like very good important stats for some classes. Not only that, minus 7 fate, which like, come on people. Then they have a plus 20 max morale, which is like, not a difficult stat to kind of boost up just doing simple deeds and such. And then they also have a plus 1% disease and a plus 1% poison resistance, which doesn't help us too much with really any of these classes. So now if we want to go to Brawler, Brawler's most very important stat is might, and their secondary is fatality. So in that case, we're going to want to look for characteristics that focus on might. Now here, men actually have a plus 15 might. So you could do a man brawler, no problems with that. There's really no boost for your fatality though. So I would try to go for something that has a boost in fatality if possible. So actually here I went through and I found the dwarf, which actually has a plus 15 might and a plus 10 fatality. And 1% common mitigation. Can't go wrong with that, honestly. Brawler's probably going to be best for your dwarfs, just your regular average dwarfs. You could do a man brawler as like your second pick, but I would go for a dwarf as a brawler personally, just because it fits both the very important stat and the secondary most important stat. For captains, they are also very much focused on might and fatality. So like I mentioned, you could do a dwarf captain. However, that was never an option that was available to us until pretty recently. It actually went against lore to have like a captain dwarf. So your best captains before that were man. So I just kind of stick with man because that's just what I know. But now, as of right now, I would definitely stick to a dwarf captain if possible. The one thing that is nice though about the man race in comparison to dwarf race for captains is that men actually have plus 15 fate, which could actually be really helpful because a lot of their buffs can give you hope and such, especially with really dark-sided enemies. It's nice to have that fate and like that hope section of it for your captains because they have a lot of buffs that can help you with that. But if you're really not focused on like raids or anything like that, I probably wouldn't focus too much on that. Though I will say too, just not even focus on stats. I really like my high elf captain, so I just want to put that out there. They're a really cool class and they hold their swords differently. Like, it's just really cool. Maybe just try that just for funsies, but next is champion. So their main is going to be might and vitality. You guessed it. I know a lot of these classes want might and vitality. So in that case, yeah, you'd probably want your dwarf to be a champion. You could also do man. The thing I will say for any of these classes that require a very most important stat of might, definitely don't pick Hobbit. Hobbit will be your worst choice. They are small. They actually have a minus 7 might on them. I'm gonna show you real quick. Look at that. And it's simply because they're small. Don't be a little Hobbit, okay? Your size is actually gonna hurt you here, okay? Next is Guardian, which is also going to be might as their very most important stat and vitality as their secondary, which again, you could do a dwarf, you could do a man, definitely don't pick a hobbit. Elves are kind of pointless with your guardians too, so maybe steer away from that. You could also do a stout axe for any of these classes that I've mentioned that have a very most important stat based on might, though I will mention that that class actually has a -7 in fatality, even though they do have a +15 might, plus a lot of other things like agility and such. Though it's kind of like a, yeah, you get a very most important stat. You do decrease a little bit on your secondary, so it kind of evens itself out to an extent. So maybe just keep that in mind too. If you wanted to do a stout axe dwarf, it is possible, but it's almost just about as pointless as like an elf in this case, because literally their stats don't really help you with anything that's super major for you. Next is Hunter, and Hunters actually have a very most important stat and agility, with their secondary being in fatality. So here we're gonna want to mix it up a bit. Now, I wouldn't say go for a stout axe dwarf just because they do have a +5 agility, which is actually really small. So it doesn't really help you too much. And then they also have a -7 fatality, so this will probably be one of the worst races you could pick for a hunter. My main thing here would be to go for the elf race for your hunters, because they actually have a +15 agility boost, and none of the races here unfortunately have an agility and a fatality boost, unlike, you know, your champions, your guardians, your captains, your brawlers, your Beornings that all focus on might, and they somehow also get fatality on their race characteristics. Though here, for your agility mains and your fatality secondaries, there's literally no race that can help you with both. So you're either going to have to choose to focus on your very most important, which I would personally do, which therefore I would choose the elf. Or if you wanted to focus on your fatality, I guess you could try to do like a Hobbit hunter. I have my own Hobbit hunter, really like her, she's really slick. And it does help too in terms of like your fear and shadow mitigation. And honestly, might isn't too important for a hunter, so not really a big loss if you were to do that. And also your regular dwarfs actually have a -7 agility with a +10 fatality, so it honestly really doesn't help you either to be a stout axe or just a regular dwarf in this case for any sort of hunters, because you're almost hurting yourself more than helping yourself. Next is Lore Master, which their very most important stat is actually going to be will, and their secondary is going to be fatality. So here we're going to want to look for more will oriented races. Now I would say here that stout axes do have a +15 will, which is pretty nice, though they do have a minus fatality, though you can't even choose this one because they don't allow lore masters in their lore. And I will say too, hobbits actually can be lore masters now, which was not the case before. But if you wanted to focus more on fatality, which I wouldn't personally recommend, you could choose a hobbit lore master. This is a newer, more recent thing for classes, but maybe this could be like your secondary go-to if your first one didn't pan out, or if you were really stoked of having a hobbit lore master. Like, it can kind of help you, but it's not the go-to. So literally none of these races fit with lore master, because the only one that really had like a will bonus you actually can't even pick. So my honest go-to is that I do have a man lore master, pretty decent, though not that helpful. So honestly, maybe the secondary is the go-to of having a hobbit lore master here, because literally if you go through here, you'd have a +1 shadow mitigation, good for lore masters, a +1 fear resistance, which is also really good for lore masters. Then you have a non-combat morale regen, which is a little helpful for you because as a lore master you are a little squishy in the beginning. So, and then you also have that +15 fatality boost, so maybe lore master is just perfect for hobbits and we've been sleeping. Next is Minstrel, and they actually also have a very most important stat of will and a secondary of fatality. Now I'm gonna tell you right now, I've always known minstrels to be hobbits. I'm always about minstrels being hobbits, though this was before stout axe dwarfs were even a thing. I would say go ahead and make a stout axe dwarf minstrel simply because they have the +15 will, and even though you do have that -7 fatality, I'm telling you, will is going to be your most important and vital stat for minstrels. Trust me. If you can't, it honestly might be better for you to be a hobbit if you don't want anything that's going to negatively affect you in terms of your traits and stats. I would definitely go for hobbit just based on their +15 vitality. Doesn't help you too much because that's not your main stat, but it can definitely help you with your secondary. I've met so many hobbit minstrels. I love hobbit minstrels. They're the best. They've always been the go-to before stout axe dwarfs just came on the scene, but this is what I would personally say just based on my experience. Plus they also have like shadow mitigation and the fear resistance, which would actually help you a lot in terms of like your healing and such, especially for yourself. You'll definitely want that if you're soloing. Next is Rune-Keeper. Rune-Keeper also has a very most important stat of will and a secondary of vitality. So here, I actually have been playing a high elf Rune-Keeper on my streams. If you do watch me over at Aubrey the Weird One on Twitch TV, I do play a high elf Rune-Keeper, which hurt me because I took a -7 will, and I'm not gonna lie, I think I kind of feel that, man. Like my Rune-Keeper is like 75 right now, and she's still just a little too squishy for my liking. So I honestly would try to say avoid it. The max morale and the disease and poison resistance actually is what drew me to high elf for it. I wanted to take a little bit of a risk, but I also wanted some stats that were going to help me if I was going to take that -7 will. But even with the morale help, it's not too big of a difference for me. So just personally, maybe don't pick high elf as your go-to for Rune-Keeper. I would say Stout Axe Dwarfs because of their will, or if not, definitely try to go for, I would say in this case, Stout Axe Dwarfs are probably your best Rune-Keepers because they do have that plus will, and unfortunately you can't pick a Hobbit Rune-Keeper right now, so it's probably for the best that you only pick a Stout Axe Dwarf because literally every other race is going to actually hurt you because they have -7 will, or even potentially more than -7 will. And even if they have the vitality boost, it kind of hurts you more so as a Rune-Keeper. So definitely, probably Stout Axe Dwarf's your best bet in this case. Last and not least is Warden. Their main go-to is agility and then vitality. So maybe focus on that, though I will say the thing about Wardens is that they actually mostly play as tanks lately, which is just insane to think about. They're more like offhanded tanks. So honestly, might probably could really help you in this case. So if you really want to focus on the most base stat, definitely go for your elf because of agility. However, I would probably invite you to reconsider to go into a man warden simply because they actually have a might boost and an incoming heal percentage of +5, which is spectacular. But that's also gonna really help you later along the lines when you're actually like raiding and stuff, because you're gonna be super vital as like an offhand tank. You could also potentially do a Warden Dwarf. This option wasn't available previously. It's actually been a newer release that's come out, so I haven't seen any too much and I haven't gotten too much feedback, though they do have that plus might and vitality increase. Like I mentioned though, your main thing is going to be agility, and they do have a -7 agility decrease, though I feel like might's gonna really help you more so than agility. I don't know why their main stat is agility, quite frankly. I never understood that too much, though that's just something to keep in mind too. And there you have it, folks. Those are my personal recommendations for which race versus which class. Now, I am barely touching the surface. There's so many other stats to even think about. So I encourage you to keep looking elsewhere and do a little bit of research if you do want to focus on more of the advanced stats. Though I would just say, especially for newer players, just focus on your base stats right now, because the rest you'll kind of learn as you go, and you can actually increase those just by doing some certain virtues. The characteristics based on race aren't going to help you too much on more of the advanced stats. It's more going to help you in the base stats, which is what we were really looking for. And as always, if you need more information and help on LOTRO, check out some of the playlists I have linked down below. I'm always posting things about upcoming guides and other tips that I would recommend for any newer or even veteran players in LOTRO. And until next time, I'll see you in the next video. Stay weird, weirdos.